Have you ever walked into a room full of people, smiled through every conversation, laughed at every joke, and genuinely enjoyed yourself, only to get home feeling completely drained? Meanwhile, everyone else seems ready to continue the night, and you're wondering why your mind feels like it has quietly shut itself down. For years, many introverts have carried this question without ever saying it out loud. Why does something I enjoy leave me so exhausted? The world usually has a simple answer. You just need to be more outgoing, speak more, network more, put yourself out there, as if personality were nothing more than a habit waiting to be changed. But what if that advice has been solving the wrong problem all along? Imagine buying an expensive camera and using it as a flashlight. It would still produce light, but you'd never experience what it was truly designed to do. That's how many introverts spend their lives. They learn how to survive in an extroverted world while rarely discovering where they naturally excel. We've been taught to see quietness as hesitation, reflection as overthinking, and solitude as loneliness. Somewhere along the way, silence became something people apologize for. Yet if you look closely, many of history's greatest breakthroughs weren't born in crowded rooms. They emerged in moments of uninterrupted thought, deep focus, and deliberate observation. Maybe the question was never, how do I become more extroverted? Maybe the better question is, what happens when I finally stop fighting the way my mind naturally works? Because this isn't a story about becoming someone else. It's about discovering that the person you've been trying to fix may never have been broken in the first place. Chapter 1. The world wasn't built for quiet minds. From the moment we're old enough to speak, we're taught that speaking more is somehow speaking better. The loud child is called confident. The quiet child is asked if something is wrong. In classrooms, participation often matters as much as understanding. In workplaces, visibility is frequently mistaken for value. Somewhere along the way, many introverts quietly absorb the same message. If you want to succeed, you need to become more like everyone else. It happens so gradually that we barely notice it. We volunteer for conversations we don't want to have, force ourselves into environments that leave us exhausted, and begin measuring our worth by standards that were never designed for us. The strange part is that none of this feels unnatural at first. It feels responsible, mature, necessary. But every time you ignore your own limits, you pay a price that isn't immediately visible. It isn't measured in hours, it's measured in energy. You leave meetings mentally exhausted before the real work even begins. You return home needing silence but feel guilty for wanting it. You start believing your need for solitude is evidence that something is missing inside you, when in reality, it's simply how your mind restores itself. Here's the irony. Nearly half the population leans toward introversion, yet many still grow up feeling like they're the exception. Not because they're rare, but because the world celebrates the traits that are easiest to notice. Confidence is visible. Reflection isn't. Charisma fills a room. Careful thinking often happens where nobody can see it. Imagine planting a deep-rooted oak tree inside a small flower pot. No matter how healthy the tree is, it will struggle because the environment wasn't built for it. Most introverts spend years blaming themselves without ever questioning the container they're growing in. Perhaps that's why so many eventually become exhausted. They're not tired because they're weak. They're tired because they've been performing instead of functioning naturally. And here's what makes this even more difficult. The longer you pretend to be someone you're not, the harder it becomes to remember who you actually are. One day you realize you're speaking more but saying less, meeting more people but feeling less connected, staying constantly busy but rarely feeling fulfilled. That's the hidden cost of chasing someone else's definition of success. The real question isn't whether introversion holds you back. The real question is what you've been sacrificing by trying so hard to hide it. Chapter 2. The day I stopped fighting my own mind. Most people don't realize they're exhausted because they've been acting. Not acting in the theatrical sense, but performing a version of themselves they believe the world will accept more easily. I know that feeling because I lived it for years. Whenever I entered a crowded room, I had a mental checklist running in the background. Smile more, speak sooner, don't let the silence last too long, keep the conversation moving, make sure people know you're engaged. None of it felt natural, but I convinced myself that was simply the price of becoming successful. For a while, it seemed to work. People described me as outgoing. They assumed I enjoyed being around large groups. Some even said I had become more confident. What they couldn't see was the cost. Every conversation felt like withdrawing money from an account I never had enough in. By the end of the day, my thoughts became slower. My patience disappeared. Even simple decisions felt strangely difficult. It wasn't because I hated people. It was because I had spent the entire day managing stimulation instead of experiencing it. There's a difference. Many introverts don't dislike social interaction. They dislike constantly monitoring themselves while they're socializing. It's mentally exhausting. Imagine driving through a city where every traffic light turns red the moment you approach it. Eventually, you still reach your destination, but you've spent so much energy stopping, starting, adjusting, and paying attention that the journey becomes more tiring than the destination itself. That's how life felt. The breaking point didn't arrive with some dramatic event. It arrived quietly. One evening, after several days filled with meetings, networking events, and social commitments, I came home and sat on the couch without turning on the television. My phone buzzed beside me. Friends were still making plans for the weekend. Normally I would have forced myself to say yes. Instead, I stared at the ceiling. Not because I was sad, not because I was lonely. I simply had nothing left to give. At first, I thought something was wrong with me. Why could everyone else keep going while I felt completely empty? But the more I reflected on that question, the more I realized I had been asking the wrong one. The problem wasn't that I became tired. The problem was that I had never learned to notice what was making me tired in the first place. That realization changed everything. We spend years tracking our finances, our deadlines, our fitness, even the number of steps we take each day. Yet very few of us keep track of the resource that influences every one of those things. Our energy, not physical energy, mental energy, the invisible currency that determines how well we think, create, connect, and recover. Once I began paying attention to it, patterns started appearing everywhere. Some conversations left me feeling lighter than before they began. Others drained me in minutes. Some environments sharpened my thinking. Others scattered it. Some people inspired ideas. Others filled my head with noise long after I'd gone home. That's when I understood something I wish someone had told me years earlier. The goal isn't to avoid life. The goal is to stop spending your energy on experiences that give you nothing in return. Because energy isn't meant to be spent carelessly. It's meant to be invested wisely. Once I started paying attention to my energy instead of my image, another question naturally emerged. If certain people, places, and experiences consistently left me feeling alive while others left me depleted, could I actually design my life around that pattern? That single question became the beginning of everything that followed. Chapter 1. The world wasn't built for quiet minds. From the moment we're old enough to speak, we're taught that speaking more is somehow speaking better. The loud child is called confident. The quiet child is asked if something is wrong. In classrooms, participation often matters as much as understanding. In workplaces, visibility is frequently mistaken for value. Somewhere along the way, many introverts quietly absorb the same message. If you want to succeed, you need to become more like everyone else. It happens so gradually that we barely notice it. We volunteer for conversations we don't want to have, force ourselves into environments that leave us exhausted, and begin measuring our worth by standards that were never designed for us. The strange part is that none of this feels unnatural at first. It feels responsible, mature, necessary. But every time you ignore your own limits, you pay a price that isn't immediately visible. It isn't measured in hours, it's measured in energy. You leave meetings mentally exhausted before the real work even begins. You return home needing silence but feel guilty for wanting it. You start believing your need for solitude is evidence that something is missing inside you, when in reality, it's simply how your mind restores itself. Here's the irony. Nearly half the population leans toward introversion, yet many still grow up feeling like they're the exception. Not because they're rare, but because the world celebrates the traits that are easiest to notice. Confidence is visible. Reflection isn't. Charisma fills a room. Careful thinking often happens where nobody can see it. Imagine planting a deep-rooted oak tree inside a small flower pot. No matter how healthy the tree is, it will struggle because the environment wasn't built for it. Most introverts spend years blaming themselves without ever questioning the container they're growing in. Perhaps that's why so many eventually become exhausted. They're not tired because they're weak. They're tired because they've been performing instead of functioning naturally. And here's what makes this even more difficult. The longer you pretend to be someone you're not, the harder it becomes to remember who you actually are. One day you realize you're speaking more but saying less, meeting more people but feeling less connected, staying constantly busy but rarely feeling fulfilled. That's the hidden cost of chasing someone else's definition of success. The real question isn't whether introversion holds you back. The real question is what you've been sacrificing by trying so hard to hide it. Chapter 4. Your energy is an investment, not a resource to spend. Most people manage their money more carefully than they manage their attention. They'll track every dollar, compare investments, and think twice before making an unnecessary purchase. Yet they'll hand over hours of mental energy without a second thought. That's a dangerous habit because attention is one of the few resources you can never earn back. Every conversation, notification, meeting, and obligation asks your brain to pay a small cost. Individually, those costs seem insignificant. Together, they determine how much of yourself remains by the end of the day. Introverts often notice this before anyone else because their minds process stimulation more deeply. They're not weaker, they're simply paying closer attention to everything happening around them. Picture your attention as a glass of clear water. Every interruption adds another drop of ink. At first, nothing seems different. Then the water slowly becomes cloudy until you can't see through it anymore. Most people assume they're tired because they've worked too hard, when in reality they've spent the entire day allowing tiny distractions to accumulate. Exhaustion rarely arrives all at once. It builds quietly, one interruption at a time. This is why solitude feels so different from loneliness. Loneliness is the absence of meaningful connection. Solitude is the return of mental clarity. It's the moment when the water begins settling again and your own thoughts become easier to hear. For many introverts, those quiet moments aren't an escape from life. They're where life finally becomes understandable. Once I recognized this, I stopped treating rest as something I had to earn. Recovery wasn't laziness, it was maintenance. Just as athletes schedule recovery to perform at their best, Quiet minds need periods of stillness to think clearly, solve problems creatively, and reconnect with themselves. Without that space, even enjoyable experiences begin to feel overwhelming. The goal isn't to avoid people or retreat from the world. The goal is to become intentional about where your energy goes, because every unnecessary distraction steals attention from something that truly matters, and every moment of protected focus is an investment in the person you're becoming. The people who seem effortlessly calm usually aren't experiencing less chaos than everyone else. They've simply become better at deciding which parts of that chaos deserve their attention. Chapter 5. The price of thinking deeply. Imagine walking into a room where 10 conversations are happening at the same time. Most people hear noise. An introvert often hears details, the tone of someone's voice, the unfinished sentence across the room, the subtle shift in another person's expression, the background music, the movement near the doorway. None of these things demand attention individually, yet together they create a constant stream of information. This is why many introverts leave social situations feeling mentally full rather than emotionally empty. Their minds haven't simply participated in the conversation. They've been processing the entire environment. While everyone else remembers what was said, they're often remembering how it was said, what wasn't said, and the atmosphere surrounding it. That depth of processing can become one of their greatest strengths, but it also comes with a cost. Think of your mind as a computer. Some people keep only a few applications open, allowing them to move quickly from one task to another. Others naturally keep dozens running in the background. They notice patterns, connect ideas, and examine possibilities without consciously trying. The computer isn't slower because it's defective. It's slower because it's doing more work behind the scenes. That's why quiet people are so often misunderstood. From the outside, stillness looks like inactivity. In reality, it may be the busiest moment inside their mind. They're connecting information, questioning assumptions, and exploring possibilities that never become visible to anyone else. Silence isn't the absence of thought. It's often evidence that thought has become deeper than words can immediately express. Modern life rarely rewards this kind of attention. Everything competes for speed, respond faster, decide faster, speak faster, scroll faster. Yet the most meaningful ideas have never arrived in a hurry. Great books weren't written between notifications. Scientific discoveries weren't made while checking messages every 30 seconds. Creative breakthroughs usually appear after the mind has been given enough uninterrupted space to wander. Perhaps this is the quiet advantage people overlook. Introverts aren't naturally gifted because they avoid noise. They're gifted because, when given enough silence, they can stay with an idea long after everyone else has moved on. While others search for the next distraction, they're still uncovering another layer of understanding. The challenge isn't learning how to think more like everyone else. It's learning to protect the conditions that allow your mind to do its best work. Because in a world that rewards constant reaction, the ability to think deeply has become increasingly rare, and rare abilities often become the most valuable. Chapter 6. The world is competing for your attention. Your attention has become one of the most valuable resources on the planet. Every app, advertisement, notification, and algorithm is fighting for the same thing: a few more seconds of your focus. Most people assume they're making countless small decisions throughout the day, but often those decisions are being made for them long before they notice. The average morning illustrates this perfectly. Before your feet even touch the floor, you've probably checked messages, glanced at social media, read headlines, replied to notifications, and absorbed dozens of opinions from people you've never met. By the time your day truly begins, your mind is already crowded with thoughts that didn't originate from you. For introverts, this constant stimulation creates a unique problem. A mind that naturally processes information more deeply also tends to hold onto that information longer. One unnecessary interruption doesn't disappear after a few seconds. It lingers, competing with your own thoughts for mental space. Multiply that by hundreds of interruptions every day, and it's no surprise that genuine concentration begins to feel impossible. Imagine trying to read a novel while someone changes the page every 30 seconds. Eventually, you stop following the story, not because the book is difficult, but because your attention never stays in one place long enough to understand it. Modern life often feels exactly like that. We mistake fragmented attention for productivity, then wonder why meaningful work feels increasingly difficult. This is why many introverts instinctively seek quiet places. It's not about escaping people. It's about escaping interruption. Silence gives the mind enough room to finish a thought before another one demands attention. That's where creativity begins to return. That's where reflection becomes possible. That's where clarity quietly rebuilds itself. Protecting your attention doesn't require disappearing from the world. It requires becoming more intentional about what deserves access to your mind. Not every notification needs an immediate response. Not every opinion deserves your emotional energy. Not every conversation has to become your responsibility. The quality of your life is shaped by the quality of your attention. Every time you choose where that attention goes, you're also choosing the person you're slowly becoming. The world will always compete for your focus. The real question is whether you'll decide what matters before someone else decides for you. Chapter 7. The Quiet Presence. People never forget. Walk into almost any crowded room and you'll notice the same pattern. The loudest voices naturally attract attention first. They tell the funniest stories, move easily between conversations, and seem comfortable becoming the center of the room. It's easy to believe they're the people everyone remembers. But think about the conversations that have stayed with you for years. Chances are they weren't the ones where someone talked the most. They were the ones where you felt genuinely understood. Most people spend conversations preparing what they'll say next. While someone else is speaking, they're already rehearsing their response, waiting for the first opportunity to bring the attention back to themselves. Listening becomes little more than a pause between sentences. Introverts often approach conversations differently. Instead of searching for the next thing to say, they become curious. They notice hesitation in someone's voice, small changes in expression, and the emotions hidden beneath ordinary words. They ask thoughtful questions, not because they've memorized communication techniques, but because understanding another person feels more natural than performing for them. That's why some of the most unforgettable people you'll ever meet aren't exceptional speakers. They're exceptional listeners. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack all day without realizing how tired you are. Then someone quietly offers to carry it for a while. The weight hasn't disappeared, but suddenly breathing feels easier. Truly being listened to creates a similar feeling. It gives people something that's becoming increasingly rare in the modern world: undivided attention. Perhaps that's why meaningful conversations feel so different from casual ones. They're not remembered because of brilliant advice or perfectly chosen words. They're remembered because, for a brief moment, another person made us feel completely seen. In a culture obsessed with visibility, many people underestimate the quiet influence they already have. Presence isn't measured by volume. it's measured by impact. You don't have to dominate every conversation to leave a lasting impression. Sometimes the person who speaks the least becomes the one everyone trusts the most because they made others feel safe enough to be honest. Quietness isn't the opposite of charisma. Sometimes it's the highest form of it.